Hello, everyone. My name is James Henley. I'm Director of RDA Toolkit. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this NARDAC Update Forum. I'm going to turn this right away over to Clara Liao, who is the current chair of the North American RDA Committee.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, I think we can start. Dear participants, welcome to NARDAC 2022 April Update Forum. I'm Clara Liao, working in the Policy, Training, and Cooperative Programs Division at the Library of Congress. The panelists are very glad to see so many colleagues registered and are looking forward to communicating with you in the Q&A sessions. Here is today's agenda. There will be a brief Q&A after Thomas and Adam's presentation. There will be a general Q&A at the end of the forum. Please note, to ensure we will be able to finish all the presentations, I will control the time for the brief Q&A session in between the presentations. We may cut the Q&A short or even skip Q&A in the middle if I think the time for the coming presentation may not be enough. Please keep putting your questions in the chat box. Even we may not be able to cover all of them in the forum, we may answer the popular or important questions in the future forums. Now let's move on to our first topic. NARDAC update. Our previous NARDAC update forum was held in August 2021. So the following NARDAC updates happen from September 2021 through now. For those who are new to this forum, NARDAC stands for North American RDA Committee. Only the cataloging communities that have been implemented RDA in North America can have representation in NARDAC. For now, those communities are American Library Association, Canadian Committee on Cataloging, and Library of Congress. The current membership of NARDAC includes 2 representatives from each of those communities. In December 2021, NARDAC members made a decision about some important organization role. I'm serving as the NARDAC chair. Bob serves as a NARDAC representative to RSC. Even though it's a 2-year term, the term is renewable. His backup is Melanie, and Melanie also maintains NARDAC web content. From September 2021 through March 2022, NARDAC members not only help to extend the RDA content and data modeling, but also worked on essential supplementary RDA cataloging documentation. In addition, NARDAC also actively connects with RSC with regard to their latest updates and researchers, reaches out to other regional representatives beyond North America. The curator proposal submitted by NARDAC on behalf of RLS, NA, and CCDA was superseded by the proposals for describing collections. At the RSC meeting in October 2021, the proposal was approved with some amendments. The results will be published in the next GitHub and RDA Toolkit releases. 4 NARDAC members were involved in metadata guidance documentation writing work. The MGD project is done now. An initial version of the guidance is available at LC's RDA MGD website. It will be used together with the official RDA toolkit and LCPCC policy statements to provide some detailed cataloging guidance with examples. NARDAC stays very active connection with RSC and our peer regional groups. Today, we are very glad to have Renata Barnes, RSC chair-elect, join the forum. For years, Renata contributes a lot to the development of RDA. After her current term as RSC chair-elect, she will serve as RSC chair for 4 years from 2023 to 2026. Renata, thanks a lot for staying late to be with us. I think in your time zone, it's already night. Do you want to say hello to our audience?
Yes, thank you very much, Clara, for inviting me to the NARDAC update. I'm very happy to be with you. Greetings from Europe, from Germany. Yes, sure, it's late in the evening for us now, but good morning for you. As you can read on the slide, I was involved in many national and international working groups concerned with standards for many, many years. And with this experience in my background, I think international cooperation is more important than ever, because the information society is changing constantly and faster in every year. And NARDAC itself as a committee is an important international partner with an excellent organization structure. And so I'm very happy to be with you today in this evening, and very happy, and I would thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope this will be the beginning of a great cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Definitely, I totally agree with you. And also, as the current chair of NARDAC, I reached out to our RDA peer regional groups, URIC and ODAC, and received great feedbacks from their chairs. Both groups agree that RDA regional communities should enhance the communications to bring mutual inspirations and benefits to RDA cataloging work. So NARDAC will keep in active contact with those groups and will invite them to our future forums to share their RDA related work and approach. So what's upcoming next? Collaborating with the ALA core division, NARDAC will have an ALA pre-conference workshop. The registration is open. And NARDAC will also host an RDA updates forum at ALA annual conference. We are working closely with ALA to finalize the time, and we do hope to do it in person and virtually, so that those who cannot travel to DC would still be able to get all the updates. We also plan to arrange our fall update forum, possibly in October. I think that's all the NARDAC updates. Let's move on to the next session. Alicia C is the RDA Education and Orientation Officer of the RIC Steering Committee. She will update about RSC training and outreach activities. Hand it over to you, Alicia.
All right, thank you so much, Clara, for that introduction. And also thank you to NARDAC for inviting me to attend this virtual forum. So over the next few minutes, I will be sharing with you some information about my work connecting with educators. I know that not all of you are familiar with who I am, so I want to just provide a little bit of an introduction on my background. In my regular day job, I work as a metadata librarian with the University of Toronto Library System, which is based in the city of Toronto, Ontario. For a number of years, I have also been contracted as a sessional instructor at the Faculty of Information, University of Toronto, where I co-teach an elective course called INF 2145, Creation and Organization of Bibliographic Records. In the last two iterations of the course, I have had the honor and privilege to design and deliver the course with a co-instructor whose name is Mei Chan, and she is the head of the Metadata Services Department at our library system. On the next slide, I will talk a little bit about the overview for this position. So one of my reasons for participating on this NARDAC panel today is to share information about what I do as the Education and Orientation Officer. And in case you're wondering what that role entails, primarily it exists to facilitate effective RDA instruction relating to the official RDA toolkits. The position is intended to encourage and support communities in their transition from the original to the official toolkits during what is seen to be an important year for training and adoption of a post-3R RDA. This is a temporary co-opted position, and my role has a limited term that runs from January 1st to December 31st of this year, although I started my work a little bit early in an elect capacity. Because this is a volunteer position, I'm also really grateful that my home institution has approved me to perform this work as part of professional service and development. Now, in terms of the specific tasks of the position, there are a number of them, and I've posted them on the slide in front of you. First of all, I liaise with RSC members and communities as they plan their outreach events. I also liaise with library and information science education communities to build an informal network of RDA educators and experts. Part of this role is also about identifying opportunities for RDA education and orientation internationally, and to recommend how to potentially handle those opportunities. My role is also about creating instructional materials for RDA content and giving related presentations. However, I should emphasize that the type of instructional materials refer to general high-level interpretations of RDA and not instructional materials that are designed for specific communities. So the latter work still very much rests within the individual cataloging communities to develop. My position also includes working with the RSC secretary in responding to some toolkit feedback and contributing to preparations for RDA revision proposals, discussion papers, and fast-track changes as appropriate. I'll tell you a little bit about my activities to date. I have so far connected with a number of regional representatives to the RDA Steering Committee. I have also been identifying and connecting with instructors who teach cataloging, knowledge organization, or metadata creation courses within library and information science programs. Sometimes I have been fortunate to benefit from word-of-mouth connections, for which I'm very grateful, but other times I have also sent out a lot of cold emails. Reaching out to instructors from different countries and regions has felt challenging at first, as well as identifying instructors who reflect a range of programs. So not only have I tried to target ALA accredited master's degree programs, with which we are most familiar in North America, but I've also tried to find instructors who teach in university degree programs elsewhere in the world, where ALA accreditation is not typical, as well as countries where there are vocational diploma or certificate programs, which differ from university degree programs that emphasize much more hands-on tasks. My general approach has been to conduct short interviews to hear firsthand from instructors about their general philosophy and method of teaching cataloging, challenges that they perceive around switching from the original to the current official RDA, as well as some tips on successful teaching approaches. I have in turn shared these observations back with RSC members. I'm going to share with you some themes that I heard in these interviews, and I will keep them anonymized. So over time, as I conducted more interviews, a number of common themes emerged. One of the most common ones was uncertainty about how to begin teaching with the current RDA. Of those instructors who had moved from the original RDA to the official RDA, or were contemplating making that transition, there was some general hesitance or fear about getting things wrong. So for example, this might have included not knowing which options to choose when presented with multiple options for a particular set of instructions, or not knowing which guidance chapter to begin with. Even though instructors expressed awareness of linked open data concepts, they were unsure of how that applied to the metadata work that they created in a library-specific context. This is especially true for instructors who did not identify as current practitioners or who teach in a vocational certificate program where there is much more emphasis on doing than on theory. For those instructors who expressed eagerness to test out the new RDA toolkits, some typical reasons that they cited included the potential for wider applications of library metadata generated, as well as a desire to prepare students for what is coming. Those who mentioned that they felt an instinct or a gut feeling that students should learn the new RDA is because they felt students could adapt from the official RDA toolkits to the original toolkit more easily if their workplaces required them to do so, but the reverse was not necessarily true. So what have instructors told me in terms of what they're looking for? Firstly, they would like to have some guidance on how to begin using the new RDA toolkit and how to teach it to students. So a number of them mentioned to me that they are seeking a way to have a narrative that they can follow. So almost like a step-by-step guide. Instructors also wanted definitions for the new terminology that they found in the official RDA. So I mentioned a couple of examples on the slide. First of all, application profiles. What are they exactly? And how does an instructor demystify application profiles for students who don't have a technical systems background? A second common question was, what could a metadata description set look like? At a practical level, some instructors really wanted to be able to answer the question, what does it mean when we say that RDA is aligned with IFLA LRM conceptual model? A number of instructors also asked for concrete examples of metadata that is conformant with RDA. And an unspoken assumption from instructors is that they wanted to see examples specifically based on the implementation scenario that their students would most frequently encounter when entering the library workforce in the next few years. A few also mused about the value of watching others create metadata using the new RDA toolkits. Since the role of the RDA steering committee is not to develop and provide training programs for specific communities, my position as the education and orientation officer is really just to provide a general orientation or help with providing a general orientation that's high level and inclusive. But as a practitioner and a cataloging instructor myself, I'm also happy to share information based on my own experience teaching cataloging using the official RDA toolkits. So for example, this past winter term, I had the opportunity to teach with the RDA toolkits a second time since its launch in December 2020. And students' reception of it was surprisingly like any other cataloging standard that they had to learn for the first time. The challenges that students struggled with were not specifically about learning the official RDA per se, so much as it was about cultivating the mindset of a cataloger while getting used to interacting with and applying a multitude of standards, policies, and documents at the same time. My co-instructor and I found that students with prior exposure to concepts of elements and property value pairs, application profiles, metadata schemas, and ontologies through their other information school courses tended to adapt more comfortably to the RDA toolkits. One student even said at the end of the term that she liked RDA and found it to be very fluid and navigable. I have to thank my student, Julia Gilmore, for giving me permission to quote her on the slide. She said, "I like envisioning how the different entities and elements interact with each other, and the RDA toolkit does a good job of drawing out the hierarchies and relationships and making those clear to the cataloger." So that was a very quick summary of some of my activities in this role with the RSC. If you have any questions after this forum around teaching with the new RDA toolkit, I would really love to connect with you. So please feel free to reach out to me by any of the email addresses that are listed. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Now I'm handing the control over to Thomas. Thomas, if you have the control, you can move on the slides. Thomas, are you muted?
Hi there. Yeah, I gave back control because I couldn't see the unmute command. So maybe I'll just leave it unmuted, or leave it unmuted, and you can hand back control to me.
Okay, let me give you back the control.
Okay.
Yay.
Okay. First screen, great. Okay. Well, I'm pleased to be here, and I'm going to talk about the new collections model in the RDA Toolkit. If you clicked recently on the RDA Toolkit with the March 2022 update, you may not have noticed immediately, but there is now a set of elements and vocabularies for describing collections. And by collections, I mean in the sense of the holdings of a library or items that are brought together for an exhibition or an archives. So a little picture of me here. I'm the chair of the Canadian Committee on Cataloging. I'm also chair of a working group with the RSC, the Extent Working Group. I'm on the North American RDA Committee, and I'm also the author of RDA Essentials. A few years ago, a collection in our descriptions was somewhat of a fuzzy concept. There is another sense of collection that we may be familiar with, such as collected works for a publication. And the Library Reference Model, or LRM, introduced a rich treatment of this idea through the concept of aggregates. Now, aggregates are about selecting and arranging expressions of works for publication. The problem, though, was in trying to understand how to handle the similar idea of selecting and arranging items to form a collection. Various aspects of the sense of collection were in RDA, but it was only a matter of time that this fuzzy concept would need to be clarified. What initiated this process of reviewing the idea of collections in RDA was a proposal by the Art Library Society of North America, or ARLIS-NA. The original RDA toolkit had a relationship element for curator-agent, but it wasn't related to a collection as a whole, but rather tied to a description of a particular item. The definition of curator-agent was problematic since it conveyed the sense of aggregating multiple items to form a collection, with an exhibition being treated the same as a collection. Basically, well, the item was an RDA entity, but the collection was not. RDA could describe items, but the collection was something in the background referenced indirectly. What the ARLIS proposal also recognized was that collections give rise to works that describe those collections. An exhibition gives rise to an exhibition catalog. When describing an exhibition catalog, it would be useful to provide access to the curator responsible for the exhibition. The curator wouldn't have direct responsibility for the catalog, but rather would have some responsibility for aggregating the items in a collection. The new RDA toolkit provides many new elements that handle this problem of indirect relationships, where there is some intervening entity that isn't otherwise described. An example now in the toolkit is a screenwriter for a motion picture. The screenwriter is responsible for an intermediary entity, the screenplay upon which a motion picture is based. But screenwriter is an element that can be added to the description of that motion picture. So NARDAC undertook the effort initially to model several possible shortcuts, basically treating the collection as, well, something. A collection is similar to an aggregate, which is a manifestation, but we can also talk about it as if it's some kind of aggregating work. And all of these ideas were explored by NARDAC, and the possible solutions were passed on to the RDA Steering Committee's technical working group to research and review. In the wider realm of cultural memory institutions, archives have already modeled out how to describe collections. I have some passing familiarity with this, as there is an archives in my library. Descriptions in an archives are made for collections as a whole, and we see terms like collection, fall, record group to describe the overall highest level. A collection can have separately described subcollections, which are variously called series, sous-font, subseries. An item is the lowest level, a single archival record or a published item. So altogether, items are related hierarchically to the collections and subcollections they are a part of. So if we step back and look at the idea of collections broadly, considering any type of collection, including library collections, what can we say about them in our descriptions? What would be useful to record in our descriptions? And there is another question that arises. What other problems in our descriptions can be resolved with a collections model? And that's something to keep in mind as you're going through this presentation with me. The collections model is not an entirely new concept. Part of the consideration in developing a collection model was to look at ways at better articulating aspects in our descriptions that can be treated more consistently. So let's look at some details we may want to record. If we describe a collection, we may want to know the methods and policies used in selecting the items and forming that collection. A collection could have subcollections, and that subcollection could in turn have another subcollection. So we would need some way of connecting the collection and subcollections. The point of a collection is to aggregate items, so we would need a way to describe a collection in terms of its holdings. We would need a way to connect a collection or subcollection to the items. And while we're looking at the items, we can see how various kinds of subcollections can form when we group or even bind together different items in our collection. Now, this is an area where the idea of collections was already latent in our descriptions. A collections model becomes useful to account for any grouping of items. We would just need elements that describe those different types of groupings. When we start seeing a collection as any other kind of RDA entity, then all of the other RDA entity relationships are possible. A collection can be related to a place, its location. If we know the location of a collection, we also know the location of any item held in that collection. And collections can be described. They can be the subject of other works, such as finding aids, catalogs, exhibition catalogs. As archives do already, we can describe the collection or subcollection as a whole, as well as describe the items in a collection. What we call a catalog is a finding aid that is related to a collection, and it describes all of the items in that collection. So when we think of collections as another kind of RDA resource, then the agents responsible for that resource can be considered. Like the original element of curator, the original toolkit had a definition for collector that was an item relationship. Even though the definition would make more sense if this element was related to the collection as a whole. A collection can also give rise to a work that describes it. The new toolkit already has a treatment for this in the form of metadata description set, which is a work of metadata. Some old relationships, such as collection, registrar, compiler, needed to be looked at. Compiler was already a work relationship, but collection registrar was an item relationship, even though that role was more aligned with the idea of a cataloger who describes a collection by describing the items in a collection. The review by the RSC Technical Working Group unearthed some problems. Some elements that could be used to describe a collection were found to be in the wrong hierarchy. Elements for finding aid and catalog were under the augmented by work element. There is another hierarchy for the description of an entity, and it would make more sense for those elements to be moved there. A description of a collection should be treated like the description of any other RDA entity. And the entity described by element does that. It is under the broader subject element. Often, when one problem is resolved, though, sometimes other problems appear. The review of the collections model also found some other issues. In the March update, you will also see a few other adjustments, such as some made to the parallel evaluated by element and its subtypes of critiquing and reviewing. Now, I mention this because there were a few other tweaks and the changes that came about with the incorporation of the collections model, and these are documented on the RSC website and through the links on the revision history in the toolkit. So with the March update to the toolkit, we now see the new placement for the elements for finding aid and catalog. These are under a manifestation described with metadata by element. Now note there's something interesting here. The relationship of a finding aid or catalog to a collection is a relationship to a manifestation. So now I'm just going to switch gears a bit and we'll look at collections, but in terms of how it fits the model of a regular RDA resource as a work, expression, manifestation, and item. If a collection is like any other RDA resource, then it has the same aspects that could be described: work, expression, manifestation, item, but some aspects are more important than others. For collections, we focus mostly on the work and manifestation aspects. Because a collection is a one-off thing, the item aspect is not really relevant as we describe that single collection as a manifestation. A collection is similar to an aggregate in that there is some intellectual effort going on in selection and arrangement. And this similar effort is the work aspect of a collection. So in describing a collection, we focus on the collection manifestation and the collection work. So the intellectual work behind a collection is described as a plan, specifically a plan for selecting items to be gathered together for some purpose. This definition picks up on the same ideas behind other treatments of works as plans, aggregating works, diachronic works. These are works as plans. The items in this particular definition refer to the separate individual resources that make up the holdings of a collection. Now, the collection as a whole is a resource in itself, and it has its own work, manifestation, expression, and item aspects. Now, I've put collection in parentheses in front to make it clear that we're talking about the collection as a whole, not any of the individual resources that make up the collection. And that's the convention I use in the other slides too. At the work level, we can describe selecting and gathering properties like a collection accrual method and a collection accrual policy. So with the March update to the toolkit, there are new work elements for accrual method and accrual policy. And there are also some associated RDA vocabularies that you'll now see in the toolkit. When we relate collections and subcollections, these are manifestation relationships. Now, this manifestation subcollection element is a new subtype of the part manifestation element. We can now relate an individual item to a collection manifestation with the new manifestation holding element. It's a subtype of the related item of manifestation element. There is a new element relating a collection manifestation to a place. There are some slightly changed elements held with and bound with. These elements that are elements that relate items, but they also form a subcollection. Their new definitions now include shortcuts. The items are related to each other, but there is an implicit collection manifestation involved. Now, with a shortcut, we don't need to worry about creating a description for that subcollection. We just need to know that's what's going on when we relate these items. The description of a collection, such as through a catalog, now fits into the overall existing structure of RDA much better. With the March update, we start with the subject relationship, and the collection model proposal inserts a new set of subtypes in that hierarchy. A catalog is a metadata work, and its subject is a collection manifestation. Existing and new element subtypes can now fit much better under the new broader element manifestation described by metadata by. Under finding aid, we have catalog, which is otherwise defined as an analytic finding aid, which is a finding aid that describes the collection by describing the individual items held in the collection. There is also the element hierarchic finding aid, which is a connection to archival description. This is used to relate a finding aid that describes the collection as a whole, plus the individual items in a collection. The March update also fixes the agent relationships. Collector agent replaces the former collector agent and curator agent, which were item relationships. The relationship is to the collection work now and is defined as a selecting and arranging role in the creation of a collection. What is also fixed in the collections model are the agent elements responsible for the metadata works. The broadest element for an agent responsible for creating a metadata description set in this case is compiler agent. And we can see in the scope note that a metadata description set in this broad sense covers a wide range of works. So that also means a metadata description set can also describe a collection. We also have a new definition for collection registrar agent. When the metadata description set is an analytic finding aid, otherwise known as a catalog, then we can use the element collection registrar agent. The original definition had this agent listing and inventorying items in a collection, and it was an item relationship. But now it is more accurately found as an agent responsible for creating metadata, specifically that metadata work that is called a catalog. And so with that shout out to catalogers, I'll conclude on this point. The collections model fixes quite a number of things in RDA and fills some gaps. So at this point, I will hand back control, but if there's any other questions.
Let me hand the control to Adam. Thank you so much, Thomas, for the presentation. While waiting for Adam to get the control, I just reminded that we will probably have we will have one brief Q&A after Adam's presentation. Go ahead, Adam.
Thanks, Clara. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that has been done within the Program for Cooperative Cataloging Standing Committee on Standards, which has been looking at developing some additional, what we used to call relationship designators, and now we're calling relationship elements for RDA. So I'm presenting this as a case study for extension of RDA elements for the related place of RDA entity. So RDA has a variety of elements that can be used to record a relationship to a place. The broadest element is the element related place of RDA entity. And there are numerous narrow elements, as you can see from the screenshot. You have things like related place of agent, related place of place, place of birth, place of residence, place of origin of work, and so on. Now, related place of RDA entity and its narrower elements map to the MARC 370 field. Field 370 is used to record places associated with an entity described in a bibliographic or authority record. And in authority records, we have various subfields set up for place of birth, place of death, associated country, place of residence or headquarters, other associated place, and place of origin of work or expression. And in bibliographic records, we have just a subset of those for associated country, other associated place, and place of origin of work or expression. Now, I want to call particular attention to the subfield F, which is a catch-all for any other relationship to a place that isn't covered by a more specific subfield that's already established. So the nature of the relationship recorded in subfield F, and to a lesser extent subfield C for associated country, can vary significantly. As I mentioned, subfield F is a catch-all field for place relationships that cannot be recorded in another more specific subfield. And catalogers have been using subfield C and subfield F to record a variety of relationships. Consider the following examples. So I've got examples of 4 person in this case, authority records. And you can see we've got a place, an other associated place associated with each of these four people. But what is the nature of each of these associated places? The subfield F, being a catch-all, doesn't really tell you anything at all about what the nature of this relationship is. If we look at the authority records in more detail, we can probably discern what that nature is. So for example, for Katie Bramlett, she teaches oboe at the University of Central Oklahoma, which is located in Edmond, Oklahoma. For James Baldwin, the place recorded in the subfield F of the 370 actually is related to his burial place. For Leigh Bowery, London is a place where they were active. And for Napoleon, St. Helena is the place where he was detained. So the PCC Standing Committee on Standards has identified relationships to places for which no specific RDA element exists. And instead of making proposals for new RDA elements, PCC has decided to publish recommended labels and URIs that can be used in the $1 and $4 of the 370 and 5XX fields. The $I is a relationship information, which is usually a textual term, what we consider to be relationship designators or relationship elements. And the subfield 4 can be used to record a URI for that relationship. These are the terms that currently have been decided upon to publish as an extension of place relationships that can be used by catalogers in authority records. So we've got, I won't read them all, but ancestral place, burial place is one of those. Discovery place, filming location, research site, significant place, setting, and so on, place of activity. So in the future, once these are published, we can have authority records that look like this, which explain more clearly the nature of the place recorded in the subfield F or the subfield C. So you can see for Katie Bramlett, we can say place of employment, for James Baldwin, burial place, for Leigh Bowery, place of activity, and for Napoleon, place of detention. And some other examples to show some of the use of the other terms. For the Sprague family from Massachusetts, we'll be able to say that their ancestral place is England. For Tina Turner, we can say that she was a United States citizen from 1938 to 2013 and a citizen of Switzerland starting in 2013. And for Tolkien, we actually can relate him to an imaginary place. So we can say he's the creator of the imaginary place Middle-earth. And for a work, we can say a relationship from a work to where it was discovered. So the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered at the Qumran site in the West Bank. And a few other examples. So for the film Chicago, we can say it was filmed in Toronto. For a ship, we can say that it's registered in Liberia. For a work, we can say that the opera Antony and Cleopatra by Samuel Barber had its first performance in New York City. And we can say that some kind of corporate body was formed in a particular place, like in this case, London. And a few more examples, we can say a particular manuscript has a repository place, a particular expedition has a particular research site. We can also relate a country to its seat of government, so a relationship between the country and its capital. We've also got a reciprocal relationship where we can say Helsinki is the seat of government of Finland. And we can use the relationship from a work to the place where a work is set. And another example of setting for a motion picture where we can have a relationship recorded in a 5XX field. So we can say that this film is set at the American Museum of Natural History and it's also set in New York City. We can say that this particular ballet had its first performance at the JFK Center. We can say that the Book of Kells has a repository place of a university or college. And we can say that Bing Crosby went to school at Gonzaga University. So A little bit about future uses. In January 2022, the MARC Advisory Committee approved the addition of subfields I and 4 to authority field 373, which is the associated group or an RDA associated institution. Some of the PCC relationship elements that we've talked about here will also be eligible for use in that field as a refinement of the RDA elements, related corporate body of RDA entity and related entity of RDA entity. So for burial place, we can name a specific place, or we can actually name a cemetery, which is a corporate body. So we can say James Baldwin is buried at the Ferncliff Cemetery. For a work, we can say have a relationship from a work to its place, but also a corporate body that the work is set in. So in this case, for Brideshead Revisited, we've got the setting is the University of Oxford, which is a real place, and we've got the setting also in Brideshead Castle, which is a fictitious corporate body, which is not established in the name authority file or the subject authority file, but does have an entity established in Wikidata. And for George Washington, we can say that his ancestral place is a particular manor in England. And again, for a work, we can say that its location of first performance, not being a particular jurisdiction, we can actually name a performance hall or some kind of other place with this same element. So you may be wondering about how can we do this? These are not in RDA. Does this make the records that where we're adding these things to conformant with RDA or non-conformant? And RDA actually has some instructions about that. RDA says that authority records that include externally defined elements are considered partially conformant RDA metadata sets. The new terms that we're talking about here implicitly describe RDA entities, even though some of them could have as an object a non-RDA entity, such as a fictitious place or fictitious corporate body. And in the RDA Toolkit guidance section under well-formed RDA, there are two sections. And the first paragraph that I quoted is a metadata statement that records a value of an element subtype of an RDA element has indirect conformance because a value of an element subtype is also a value of an element supertype. The element subtype may not be an RDA element, which is what we're talking about, elements outside of RDA. And they also say that a metadata description set is partially conformant with RDA if some, but not all, of its metadata statements are conformant with RDA. This will be the case if a local application profile, such as we're talking about here with the PCC, establishing new elements, if a local application profile specifies the use of a mix of elements or entities from RDA and from other standards. This isn't new. Our MARC authority records already are partially conformant with RDA. We have MARC fields that are not covered by any particular RDA element. And that's all I have to say. So thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Adam. I think we do have some time for a brief Q&A session. Jamie, have you monitored the chat box and then let us know any questions for the panelists?
I have been monitoring the chat box. Unfortunately, most of the questions were about the pre-conference that you mentioned at the beginning.
Okay.
And I just clarified that the times you showed were Eastern Daylight Times, and that there is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, Clara, there is no virtual component to that pre-conference, I believe.
That's correct. No virtual, unfortunately, in this case. It will be in-person workshop. But for the ALA RDA NARDAC update forum, we will try to make it virtual if possible.
That's all we have for now.
Okay, if no more questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Melanie. Melanie will start her part of the presentation.
And then, where is my, okay. So hello, everybody. My name is Melanie Polluta from the Library of Congress. And as one of the people who's worked intensively on the policy statements and the MDDs, I was one of the ones who volunteered to give what I call a very quick demo. Now I'm going to warn you, I'm going to be moving fairly quickly. So, but remember that this is being recorded. So if I am going too fast for you, you can come back and look at things at a later point. However, briefly, I'm going to start with a few facts that are the background of this whole process. Where in the world did we get started? And why did we go through all this process of changing the documentation? The biggest thing has to do with the fact that when original RDA became official RDA, the text was completely reconstructed. And anything that was a direct instruction that said, do this, it now became an option where you can do this or you can do this. And therefore, the policy statements had to change radically. We had to have a whole bunch more because now the policy statements had to say, do this, don't do this. And because of how they were implemented in the RDA toolkit, we also made the decision to remove all examples and decisions or explanations about MARC and BibFrame implementation from the policy statements. And we moved all of that to the external documentation, which is the metadata guidance documentation. So that was a really condensed explanation of the changes that these have undergone, but I wanted to give that background because it will help you understand where I'm going when I'm navigating through the toolkit, the policy statements, and the MGDs, and a bit more, I hope, about what kind of information I'm looking for. So when Bob and I decided to collaborate on this presentation, I basically said to him, pick up a book that's on your desk, because he's the one who still actively catalogs, whereas I, as a policy specialist, end up with far too much documentation on my desk and no works to catalog. So we are actually working on this work, the early Greek alphabets, with the subtitle Origin, Diffusion, Uses, edited by Robert Parker and Philippa M. Steele. But this is the actual dust jacket. What is the actual source we are going to be referencing first? And that is the title page. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept. Now here's where we plunge into the documentation. So I've got this one title page with 4 different elements that I need to record. Where do I go to find out what I need to record and where I need to look for it? Now, the first thing to remember is I still haven't decided definitively at this point, am I looking at the title page as my primary resource? Yes, the answer is, because as we've stated before, we have not changed our cataloging practice in this change of documentation, but where do I find that statement? The answer is here. This is, let me go up to the top so you can see, this is the guidance pages data provenance. And specifically, I am looking at the instructions that say, I am recording a source of metadata that is a manifestation that is being described. So going there, I have that context, and here I have the condition that I am meeting. It is a manifestation, and that manifestation consists of 1 or more pages, leaves, sheets, or cards, i.e., in this case, it's a book. So I look at my option, says to prefer the following recording sources in this order. And at the top of that list is the title page, which is good. And so now I need to know, am I using this option? And the answer is over here, LCPCC practice, apply the option. In other words, yes, I'm applying this option. I am going to use the title page as my preferred resource for this book.
Melanie,
yes?
could you please show people how to see the policy statements? Because perhaps in some of those, they won't see the policy statements unless they actually say they need to.
Yes, okay. Then I will back up to the top of this page. And if you have not set your defaults to do this, you can do that. But if you have not, then you would simply go to the select policy statement set and choose LCPCCPS. And when you do that, you will see all of the LCPCC policy statements to the right of the options. Is that what you were asking about, Bob?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and you can see here that we also already have the British Library and the Music Library Association best practices policy statements. So we're not the only ones in here, but we are the ones with the largest number at this point in time. So you can also see that there are multiple policy statements attached to this one option. If you want to be able to see all of them without having to scroll up and down like that, you can click on this hyperlink at the top, and you can see all of them in order. without having to scroll up and down. And you can see that the following policy statements apply to more specific things. In this case, series. In this case, serials. Down here, it's actually talking about a manuscript. So while there is usually one general policy statement at the top, you may have other policy statements that have more limited application that follow. So understand that you may need to look at multiple policy statements at one location. So that is the basic instruction that we know our source of information is still the same. So now that we know that, what's that first thing that we need to record? It is the title proper. And so we go to this instruction. Record a value of manifestation, the title of manifestation. Now, what in the world, you say? What is a title of manifestation versus a title proper? Well, just so you know, this is not new. This is, in fact, what we faced with original RDA. There was a general instruction and there was a more specific instruction. And of course, this logged out while I was waiting. I was all ready to go. So you can look over here under identifying manifestations and items and see that there is the general instructions, basic instructions on recording titles. Everything that was there is what goes under title of manifestation. And then you have the more specific elements. So here we have the title proper. And so we still have a question. Do we have to record this? And the answer to that is always going to be found at the pre-recording level, where the policy statement will have LC PCC core. If it is required, or if it is required under certain conditions, that is where it's going to say it at the pre-recording level. So you now know for sure title of proper is required. And you also can see that your basic instruction is record this value as a value of this, apply the option. And then we also have down here all of the other situations that may apply to titles proper. We're not going to go through these because our resource happily was a fairly simple one and we don't have introductory words or 2 or more languages or scripts, etc. We don't have to devise a title, but we may have to consider titles proper of aggregates, but we'll get to that in a minute. First, I wanted to go back to title of manifestation. Once again, remember this is the broader element. The title proper is the narrower element, as well as a bunch of other narrower elements. And here we don't have a core statement. Why? Because only specific ones here are core. In this case, title proper has the core statement, but the general element does not. However, because of the way the instructions work, you will still come here to consider situations that may apply. In this case, other situations that have exceptions or unusual contexts or things that apply specifically to music or specific situations with devised titles and so on. And also you have this one big basic instruction that you will see again and again. Record a title by transcribing, because this is a transcribed element, text and spoken word content from a manifestation using the guidance on normalized transcription. This will come up again and again because you have to go to that place to find out how do you handle capitalization? How do you handle language and script? How do you handle numbers, etc. So this one really comes up a lot in the manifestation elements because we are talking about transcribed elements. And each of these has options with their own policy statements. So we looked at title manifestation and title proper. What is the next element from that resource? Well, that is in fact the other title information. So remember that that is a narrower type of title of manifestation, and it is also a transcribed element. So our base option is, once again, transcribe it, unstructured description by transcribing text using those guidelines. That is the option you apply. Now let's pause a moment and look here. There are 3 different options and all of them start by saying the same thing. Why are you use one or the other? Well, one says use the guidelines on basic transcription. We're not using those. One says using any transcription guidelines. We follow a specific guideline. Then we say use the guidelines on normalized transcriptions. These 3 options kind of work together, which is why one says do not apply, one says apply, and one says do not apply. Always consider them as a group. So once again, we then have the question. Is other title information required? Remember, pre-recording, you look at the LCPCC level, and here you have LCPCC core for monographs, which means it is core with limitations. It may not be core for other types of formats. So always consider your context. Now, do we have a metadata guidance documentation element? I didn't look at that with title proper. It still applies, but where do you find that information? Well, the process we're going through with metadata guidance documentations, we're still getting those links into the policy statements. This past update was our first pass. We only did it for manifestation elements, and we only did it at this high level, i.e. at the pre-recording level. So you will see these standard links here that say, see the metadata guidance documentation, manifestation elements. That's an indication that yes, there is an MGD about other title information on this page. So you go here, lo and behold, this is the navigation page for all of the MGDs related to manifestation elements. And they are in alphabetical order according to element name. So I scroll down and find, let me make that just a little bit bigger because that's really kind of tiny. Other title information. So here it is. I need to look at it. Let me click on it and figure out, is this something I need to consider? And so this has specific instructions about when there are multiple elements of other title information, when the other title information is not on the preferred source, or when there is a section title and number. This has further instructions, and it also includes MARC examples and BibFrame examples, as you can see here. So if you see these things up here, they are clickable links. So it goes down to that bottom, and you can see that information there. So I was able to find very quickly and easily that yes, there is a MGD I need to consult because it was up here, and that it was easily navigable on that page. Note that we will be continuing in the next update to add more links to the MGDs for the June update. And so you will over time continue to see them both at this high level, and when it is appropriate, we will add them to a policy statement attached to a specific condition or option. So that is an ongoing process, and is one of the reasons why I stuck with manifestation elements, because those are the only ones at this point that do have links to the MGDs. So the next thing we look at is statement of responsibility. And I'm looking at time and it's going so fast, so I'm going to have to limit how much I go through. Excuse me. Pardon. Okay, so where is our instruction? Here on the statement of responsibility page, we have that exact same instruction regarding using the guidelines on normalized transcription. We have the LCPCC practice, which is to apply. We also have a further statement, optionally transcribe the statement of responsibility as given on the source of information. And this kind of goes back to the fact that we are still allowing people to not fully apply all of those guidelines, but to capitalize as given. And that falls through for the other things. Now here we have, once again, a broader element, statement of responsibility, and a whole bunch of narrower elements. And here we have the statement of core. Yes, the statement of responsibility is core. We have further explanation about, for the monographs, only the first recorded statement of responsibility relating to title proper is an absolute requirement, but we are encouraged just to transcribe more. And then, of course, there is a link to the MGDs. And then statement of responsibility relating to title proper is the specific element that we're recording. It repeats a certain amount of that same statement because this is where it specifically applies. And then we have further caveats for rare atlases, rare books, archival moving images, and so on. So you will then have to look at the appropriate instructions here, which is down under recording an unstructured description. You'll record one or more statements that identify the creators of expressions or works embodied by a manifestation. As it was core, way up there at the top, you have to record the first one. So is there MGDs? Well, we did have that link to that. And so we'll look over here and see. Yes, indeed, there is a statement of responsibility when there are two or more agents, which We have 2 or more agents in one place. So we can look at this and consider whether or not this does apply to what we have here. So you can see that it repeats a certain amount of the information. And in this case, we are actually lacking some examples. So if you have an example for this one, feel free to send one in to coop@loc.gov. We're looking for more information. So we've made it through all of those elements, 3 of the 4 elements that are on that title page. And so we're going to look at that last one, which is the publisher. Once again, we have a broader, narrower situation, although in this one, it is actually a super element, sub-element situation. Once again, this is a transcribed element following those guidelines, which we do apply. And what is this? This is the publication statement. It is a super element composed of 3 sub-elements. Is it core? Yes. LCPCC core for manifestations in published form. So we will be recording this entire statement, but let us focus on the more specific element, name of publisher, which is what we find on our title page. So here we have name of publisher. It is core. We're going to record it. And then we go to, wait, let me get my link because this is why I did this. Copy link. It goes straight to the specific instruction that says pretty much the same thing. It's transcribed, follow those guidelines. There are, of course, other options to consider. If you have a situation where it's a false or fictitious entity, if you have the name of publisher not identified, if you have a statement of function, all of these can be considered as well. The options are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Some of them work together, some of them work in opposition, some of them simply apply to different conditions. So you must read the condition and the instruction to see what applies to what situation. I can't work through every single option here because we really don't have time. But then we have the question, is there an MGD to look here? Well, there's no link here, so there shouldn't be. Let's see if there's one for publication statement. It should be here. No, oh, that's still name of publisher, excuse me. It didn't go where I wanted it to. There it is, publication statement. And here we have a link to the manifestation elements. Yes, so I could go here and find out that yes, there is an MGD on recording changes in publication statements and sources of information for SIP cataloging. So both of those are MGDs that apply to the overall publication statement. Neither of them applies to the resource that we are using, so I don't have to look at them. Everything I need is in the RDA toolkit, the text and the policy statements. So, I mean, I'm checking time, 4:09. Okay, I've got time to go through a few more elements. I could go through a whole bunch more, but I'm going to focus on one more set of pieces of information because I really am concerned about time deeply. I'm going to go down here for 2 things. The last numbered page, this is the extent of manifestation piece of information that everybody has to record at one point. So what do I have to record here? Now, the interesting thing about extent of information, extent of manifestation, excuse me, is it is the longest element page. It has the largest number of instructions on any one page that I know of. And so it's really, really interesting to navigate. And I do believe that it's on the RSC's radar to work on this page and break it down into more component parts to make it easier to handle. And that is actually important to know because what I'm about to show you is one of the reasons why they're going to think about breaking it into component parts. When you record extent of manifestation, you're recording 2 different pieces. You're recording the number, the value, and the type of carrier. In this case, because I'm dealing with a book, I look at the specific term that's appropriate to the subunits inside the book. And in that case, it's page or occasionally leaf. There is, in fact, a definition here when I click on it, a unit of extent that consists of a single side of a leaf, and that it comes from this vocabulary encoding scheme that RDA has defined and controlled very carefully. So we know that we're going to record an appropriate term for this because that's what's appropriate to the format I'm dealing with. Apply the option. So I know what term I'm going to use, but how do I know the instruction for the amount? In this case, it's a pretty basic one because we're dealing with books. And so I go to the basic option at the beginning of the list, specify the number of subunits. Unfortunately, this book didn't have multiple pagings or 2 or more carrier types or irregular paging or all those other situations that do occur. It's a basic instruction that I can follow and I apply that option. But you can see in this list, we do have a long list of possibilities, exact number of units not readily ascertainable, unit and sets of units with identical content, types of numbers of subunits of specific formats that are all over the place. So I'm sure many of you will recognize the instructions here from the same area for extent of manifestation in original. And you can see how many different things. So extent of manifestations of text is where you then have the more specific instructions on when it is single volumes with numbered pages, leaves, or columns. And here is the more specific situation for the book. A manifestation consists of a volume and you record an extent in terms of pages, leaves, or columns according to the type of sequence used in the manifestation. Hey, LCPCC says apply the option. So you can see that the instructions are navigable. Now, is there any MGD that I need to look at? Well, let's go back up to the top because remember, this is always going to be at the pre-recording level and say, yes, here are the links to the metadata guidance documentation manifestation elements. So let's see what it has to say about extent. And lo and behold, we do have a specific instruction about the terms to use. So let's look and see what that tells us. And it gives us more instruction on when we're dealing with incomplete, tangible, non-print resources or integrating resources, or when we're dealing with multi-port monographs and so on. And it also, as you can see, has very good examples in MARC as well as in BibFrame. So you do have an MGD here to look at for specific situations. It is not for every situation that you need to consider the MGDs. Okay, we will do one more little area where, excuse me, let's look at the actual resource again. So here we have the table of contents. So as you can see from the table of contents, let's make it just a bit bigger so you can actually see, it is in fact a compilation of essays by different authors. This means by definition, it is an aggregate. That always then leads to a challenge because nowadays we have an actual change in practice because we're going to be recording different relationships for aggregates. So having done that, let's go consider what are the instructions that we're going to need to consider. And the answer is we're recording the expression manifested relationships. Now, this is one of those where the LC PCC policy statements are so close together, it's really hard to see them. So we're going to go and look at the other page, what's called the mirror page. So here we have our pre-recording statement. I know that this is linked to that title section, and I know that this is core for collection and parallel aggregates. What is the collection aggregate? You say, that is what this collection of essays is. It's a collection aggregate. So for an aggregate situation, record the first or predominant expression, which is the same instruction we've been implementing all along. You can record other expressions according to judgment. So you do have the option of doing more. You don't have to. It is not necessary. We still have that limitation for anthologies of poetry, hymnals, conference proceedings, journals, collections, blah, blah, blah. And then we have other situations for other types. So you got the parallel aggregate, you've got expressions of aggregating works, and so on. So here's the important thing. Do I have something to look at? And yes, indeed I do. I need to go look at what is called the topical MGDs. What is the topical MGDs? These are the MGDs that are not specific to one particular element. They are the narrative ones that try to address all of the stuff related to one specific entity. And so in this case, or a specific topic, we have an MGD on aggregates. And this one is an excellent MGD with many careful instructions and an entire section with everything you need to know about how to handle collection aggregates. So this will help you know, okay, I need to do this type of approach, and this is the type of access to content that I need to give as an extra access point. So I can give this 700 with the expression manifested relationship. And that's the first one, the first and or predominant one, as the policy statement said, that I'm required to give. All the rest of them are optional. So this MGD goes into all the detail you need to know about how to handle those situations. Okay, so I've skipped over quite a few things in concern for time. So I am now going to stop sharing and hand it over to Bob, who is going to talk about the relationships that can be recorded.
So Clara, you need to take over again and give me permission.
I'm handing the control over to Bob. Bob?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't seem to have control yet. Or maybe you'll just have to change the slides. Can you go to the next slide? Oops. Okay, maybe I do have control. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about using the toolkit and metadata guidance documentation to record relationships. I'm going to speak as quickly as I can, but I'm afraid we may go over a little bit at the end. Melanie has demonstrated using the new toolkit and metadata guidance documentation to describe a manifestation. I'm sorry for the noise in the background. They are attaching a cell phone tower to the side of the building next to my office. I'm sure this will be a great advantage someday, but anyway, I will speak as loudly as I can. So I'm planning to demonstrate using the new toolkit and the metadata guidance documentation for recording relationships, both in bibliographic records and authority records. I'm going to be concentrating on just one of the sets of metadata guidance documentation, which is agent-to-agent relationships. But what I say should be applicable to all kinds of relationships. The purpose of the demo is to demonstrate the documentation, not to necessarily train you about how to do this. So keep that in mind. So in old RDA, original RDA, information about recording relationships was found in several sections comprising the second half of the text and a number of appendixes listing relationship designators. Relationships were not treated as separate elements, but they were identified by relationship designators, as you know. So now in the official RDA, which is not yet implemented, I just remind you all, relationships have graduated to become elements in their own right. And incidentally, there's a lot more of them than there were in the original RDA. All relationships relate to a particular RDA entity. So for example, to find out about possible relationships to an instance of a work entity, go to the entities drop-down menu and choose work. And you can follow along, I guess, on your own computer if you'd like, as I demo this. So here we are at the work. What happens when you choose work and under the entities drop-down? If you scroll to the very bottom of the section, you will see a list of all the elements, both descriptive and relationship elements that are related to the work entity. You will notice that it's a very long list, and it's in alphabetical order by the name of the element. So maybe it's not all as helpful as you might want it to be. So if you now click on, at the top, you see the radio button, by relationship elements, that shortens the list to only show relationship elements. But it's still a pretty long list. You can narrow further by choosing in the drop-down the entity your work is related to, or the entity that you're in is related to. So in this case, let's think about the relationship of the compilation of the early Greek alphabets, which we've been cataloging, Melanie's been cataloging, to the person Robert Parker. he is listed on the title page as the editor of the collection of essays. What does the editor of the collection do? Probably the chief thing Robert Parker and Philippa M. Steele did was choose and arrange the works contained in an anthology. There is a relationship between Robert Parker and the work as a whole. We know that. The work as a whole is a compilation, by the way, don't forget. So we're going to choose in the drop-down person because this is a relationship between a work and a person. I know this is slightly different from what Melanie just told you, and so I'm taking a slightly different approach to this. All right, so you can narrow down further by choosing in the drop-down menu the type of entity your work is related to. So in this case, we got the compilation early Greek alphabets, which we've been cataloging, and the person is Robert Parker. He's listed on the title page as the editor. Oh, I'm sorry. I am sorry. I was hurrying along and slowed down by rereading the page I just read. So looking through the possible work-to-person relationships, aggregator person looks likely. This element, as you can read on the side, denotes a person who is responsible for creating and aggregating work by selecting and arranging expressions of other works. So looks like that might be the relationship we want to record. Note that there are a couple other relationships. Editorial director person seems like it might be a possibility, but it is currently defined as only a relationship to a diachronic work, which is not the early Greek alphabets. Another possibility might be, you might think, would be compiler person, but it too seems to be defined a bit too narrowly, which is a person who is responsible for creating a metadata description set. A metadata description set includes a bibliography, directory, places, an analytic finding aid. We saw this on Thomas's presentation. None of these seems to be what we have with the early Greek alphabet. So for the sake of the demonstration, without any quibbling or arguing, let's just go with our aggregator person. So how do we record the relationship? The name of the relationship element is aggregator person in official RDA, but that is not the equivalent of the relationship designators in original RDA, which is to say, this is intended only to name the element. It is not necessarily the label we would want to use to identify the element, especially in public displays. We could record the relationship either in a bibliographic record or in a pair of authority records, but in either case, we need a label. So now, agencies such as PCC are free to make policies about the labels that are going to be used to identify relationships in public displays. And PCC has made the decision to use, quote, user-friendly, unquote, labels. Of course, user-friendly is somewhat in the eye of the beholder. We all admit that. So these labels are found in the metadata guidance documentation. This is the URL. Melanie's already showed you that there will be links from the toolkit, but if you want to just go directly there, this is the URL to get to the metadata guidance documentation. So if you go there, oops, I went too far. Here is what you see when you go to that URL, and you will see that page Melanie just showed us. But if you go to the bottom of the page, you will see a link that goes to relationship labels. So let's go there. The relationship labels link takes us to a page that in turn takes us to the PCC labels for various relationships. Now, this is kind of a complex page, and it reflects the complexity of RDA. I'm very sorry. There are hundreds and maybe thousands of possible relationships, so we're doing our best to make it sort of more comprehensible here. So let's first take a brief look at the introduction. All of the, almost all of the MGDs are formatted similarly. We have to say they were all written by different people, so there are differences between them. But normally they start with an overview, and in this case it does. And this particular MGD talks about the principles on which it was decided what were the user-friendly labels. So going down to the bottom of that introduction page, we see links to all of the different kinds of relationships. And our relationship, we've already figured out by looking at RDA, is a relationship between a work and a person. And so let's click there. And looking through, we see the relationship that we thought might be the right one, aggregator person. These individual pages list in alphabetical order by the element name, and they include the definition of the element, the PCC relationship label, and its inverse. And then the links you see are to RDA itself. So we see from this page that the PCC relationship element to be used for the element that's called aggregator person is just plain aggregator. We can use this in the bibliographic record for the early Greek alphabets with the access point for Robert Parker. So voila, you can use simply the aggregator there to describe what he's doing, what he did in relationship to this publication. Now, there are, of course, lots of other kinds of relationships that were recorded. For example, there is, as Melanie noted, a relationship between the compilation, the early Greek alphabets, and individual works within the compilation. In current cataloging practice, most catalogers wouldn't record this relationship in a formal way, except maybe in a contents note. But an institution in which one of the authors is located might want to record one or more of these relationships, and RDA certainly permits it. This is a work-to-work relationship. Following the same procedure, we go to the work entity and look through the work-to-work relationships by narrowing the relationships listed at the bottom, as described above. I'm not going through it here. And we find a relationship called part work. The individual articles in the early Greek alphabets are discrete components of the compilation, which is the definition of part work. So moving on to the metadata guidance documentation for relationship labels, we find under work-to-work relationships, part work, and we see that the PCC label is part. There's also a note that previously under original RDA, we were using container of work for this. Now, most relationship labels we've been using won't be changing on implementation of official RDA. I don't know what PCC may be planning, but in keeping with past practice, if there are changes, there's no need for individual catalogers to go back wholesale through the bibliographic or authority files and change relationship labels like this that have a different label under official RDA. It might be appropriate if you happen to be in the record for some other reason to update the label, but otherwise, let's leave it to PCC or OCLC to do programmatic changes. So here is what that might look like if we wanted to bring out one of the parts of the early Greek alphabets as an authorized access point. So there's also a relationship to a series, the Oxford Studies in Ancient Documents. And I just point out there is metadata guidance documentation about series, which we're not going to really look at. Please have a look on your own, but be aware that this particular MGD is still under development because of sort of late breaking decisions of POCO. So now we are almost out of time, but I would like to spend a little time looking in more detail at how one of these MGDs works. And the MGD is agent-agent. So I hope that Zoom doesn't cut us off, and I hope that many of you can stay for another, maybe, I hope not more than 5 minutes. So let's look at the agent-to-agent MGD. So as I said, the MGDs were written by many different people within and outside of LC. So they differ in style and organization, but they are all intended to offer guidance as to PCC policy, and in many instances, more basic cataloging guidance. Most of the narrative MGDs begin with a table of contents like this. And then they have an overview, which kind of is an overview. And then there is usually a summary of changes between original RDA and official RDA. And then we get to the actual guidance. So in the case of this particular metadata guidance document, there is a kind of a workflow, which we're going to go through for this to create a relationship here. So we see on the dust jacket that Robert Parker, who is one of the editors, is a Wickham Professor Emeritus of Ancient History at the University of Oxford. So he had a relationship with the University of Oxford. Let's say we want to record this relationship. In current PCC practice, this relationship would be recorded in the NACO authority file. So first, metadata guidance documentation workflow says discover that there is a relationship between an agent and another agent that you want to record. And it says an agent is a person, family, or corporate body. And we know there is a relationship between Parker and the University of Oxford. Now, I want to note here, these RDA relationships are outside of time. That is, we are not just recording relationships that exist right now. We can record relationships that existed at any time between two agents. So the relationship here is that he has been a professor, an employee of the university, but it will be recorded without reference to whether that relationship still exists today. So just keep that in mind. So the second step talks about what the definition is of a relationship, and it instructs us to find the most specific RDA relationship to describe the relationship, which is similar to subject cataloging practice. And it notes that there's help elsewhere in the MGD about how to find the correct relationship. Step 3 states that restates the NACO requirement that in order to record a relationship in the name authority file, each agent entity must be established. And in this case, both are. I've given them both at the bottom of the slide. Fourth step says to record the related agents in 5XX field exactly as found in its own name authority record. So for example, if the name authority in the name authority record for Robert Parker, we're going to record the related entity, University of Oxford, in a 510 field. So the MGD informs us that the agent recorded, now here's some sort of new vocabulary for them. The MGD informs us that the agent recorded in the 1XX field is called the domain of this relationship. And the agent recorded in the 5XX is the range. Knowing this is important sometimes for determining which relationship element applies. So fifth step instructs us to find the appropriate relationship element and then record its label within the 5XX field. Well, what is the relationship element for this relationship? Okay, going through RDA, we started with person, we looked at the elements, and we found under elements of person related to corporate body, employer. And that one looks likely it's a corporate body who employs a person, i.e. the University of Oxford. So going to the relationship labels MGD, we go to the same place, we go to the person to corporate body labels, and there we find employer. And unsurprisingly, we discover that the relationship label is employer. As I said, most of these are not going to change. We're used to using most of these. So we're following the same practice we have all along. You plug in the relationship label in an authority records following subfield W and an R in subfield I, so employer, colon, subfield A, University of Oxford. So we are finished recording this relationship in an authority record. Now, the document talks about inverse relationships. There are lots of sections in this MGD, and one of them pertains to inverse relationships. Every RDA relationship has an inverse, and we potentially could record each relationship and its inverse in the pair of authority records for the related entities. And sometimes we do this, in fact, recording the relationship in both authority records. But this MGD notes that in PCC practice for employer-employee relationships between persons and corporate bodies, we normally record the relationship in the record for the person, but not in the record for the corporate body. Now, this doesn't mean that we're missing information here. The system itself understands that the relationship goes both ways. And so although RDA certainly permits it, PCC practice in this case would not record the inverse relationship of employee in the record for University of Oxford. And you can see why, if we started listing all the employees of the University of Oxford in its record, that would become a huge, huge record. It's worth noting that other MGDs explicitly comment about whether or not to record inverse relationships. For example, the element place of birth of says not to record it, a place of birth in this way, instead to use a 370. So there's lots of things in the MGDs about that. All right, so I think I did it in 6 minutes beyond the end, and perhaps we'll be able to expand a little more at the workshop at ALA, I hope.
Definitely. I believe there will be lots of interactive communications at the pre-conference workshop, and it will be fun. I think we still have over 20 minutes for the Q&A.
I thought we were ending at 3.
Our panelists,
here.
Yeah, our panelists start the practice earlier, so they may think the session end around 4:30. No, around we end the session around 5 o'clock. So, Jamie, any questions that needs to be answered by the panelists?
Well, there have been lots of questions. Thank everyone for that. And I think we should also thank Melanie for diving in and answering all of them in the chat area. I don't know if you want me to kind of bring these back up again.
No, no need to bring, if the questions already being answered, and no need. Any new popping questions?
I personally did not read the chat, so I wouldn't mind a little summary of what's been asked about.
Well, what I will do is when we put up the recording for this, we'll also put up the full transcript of the chat so everyone can follow it. But there've been a lot of questions about the MGDs and what exactly is in them and what we can expect from them, which Melanie has addressed. It's kind of hard for me to navigate at this point. Because Melanie addressed them after she was done with their thing. So they're kind of spread out. I'm trying to find out where they begin now.
So I would like to make a comment about the editor label. The editor label, which several people appear to have asked about. I was looking at this at a work-to-work relationship, and there's no, editor label is an expression label. It's related to the expression. And so the reason I did not choose editor for this relationship is because, first of all, the editor label under expression is defined differently. It's not defined as a person who puts together materials like this anthology was. And furthermore, I was looking at this as a work to a work. It was the work, the aggregated work, to the work inside the aggregated work. So I'd say in my view, this is a work-to-work relationship, and that's why I wanted to bring out the relationship, which is called aggregated person. So that's the reasoning for that. Editor doesn't really work very well for this particular relationship in current RDA either, although I know a lot of us use it for this.
I'll add a quick answer to the question that just came up in the Q&A box. Are the MGDs going to be updated on the typical quarterly release cycle? The answer to that is both no, and we're still discussing that because they're brand new. And so we haven't really settled on a pattern with them yet, but we do not plan to limit them to the quarterly update cycle that RDA and the policy statements will follow. But we may trigger have reports on a quarterly basis to say, okay, these are all the changes that took place during this time span when RDA was undergoing this update and the policy statements as well, so that they more or less kind of stay in sync. But we will not have to wait on that kind of cycle for the MGD updates.
So I probably missed a whole bunch of questions in between, but this very last question from Crystal, who says, should PC's catalogers be treating labels in the RDA toolkit as decoys and completely ignoring them? The the answer to that is there are no labels in the RDA toolkit anymore. Those names of the elements are not, and we've been told by the people who wrote this, which was before I got into it, but that they are not labels. They are meant to be just simply the names of the elements. And the names are not the same thing as the labels, which is why PCC developed a list of what PCC would use for the labels. So it's not really saying they're decoys. We're just saying there are no labels in the RDA toolkit, in the new RDA toolkit anyway. And so we need to provide you with a list of labels to use, because we certainly use labels in our to identify relationships in both our bibliographic and authority records.
I would like to, this is Jamie, I'd like to quickly just clarify one thing. Someone asked where the recording will be, and another person correctly said that it will be on the YouTube channel, which it will be on the YouTube channel. But it'll also be, we'll post a link to the rdatoolkit.org blog. And that's also where you will find the link to the chat transcript. I'll try and link to the chat transcript from the YouTube page as well, if I can. But I just want to make sure that people know it'll be in 2 places. So. Okay. We've had a couple other comments to some of the discussion here. Kathy Glennon noted that unconstrained elements are not in the RDA toolkit. And Linda also clarified that RDA does have element labels. However, element labels should not be used as display labels.
Yes, that's what I meant, Linda, so sorry.
Yeah. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in. Claire,
On the question of unconstrained labels, elements, I am not the big expert about that. Maybe Adam could speak more, or someone else could, but one of the reasons my understanding is for the unconstrained labels is that when the specific designators in the current RDA were introduced that said author person and author corporate body and author this and that, everybody really hated that. And so that was why my understanding is why PCC says, okay, we can solve part of this by using unconstrained. Unconstrained means not constrained to person, corporate body, or family, and just say author. So I thought that, but Adam, maybe you could say something about that, or somebody else who knows a little more.
I posted that it was a recommendation of a PCC task force that POCO adopted. I wasn't on that task force, so I can't say much more about it. But
I think that was the part of the reasoning anyway behind it.
And that sounds right.
Maybe someone is here from the task force that could say.
I don't think any one of us is serving that task force.
Maybe I can add something here. I just see the more comments in the chats is that there is a difference between a name for an element and a display label. So anything like any of those unconstrained element labels can't be used as the equivalent of an RDA element. The RDA element has a reference label, and for legacy purposes, what it would have been previously called in the original toolkit is there as alternate labels. But the element is just the organizing basis for the instructions and application profiles and policies. And so display labels are something that happens in the process of creating records in your however you're implementing it. The RDA element just needs a name that's distinct. That's the main point there.
So I think a lot of people were quite shocked to see those names of the elements, and we need to assure everybody that those are not necessarily going to be what can be used in public displays. That's right.
Any other questions relating, other than the unconstrained elements relating to the presentation today?
I'd like to add to what Linda just said. I have been advocating the idea that we could use a label, an unconstrained label, or a user-friendly label, and actually use the constrained URA in conjunction with that label, and then the URI, the constrained URI, would be pointing to the real element, and the label is just what displays to people. And so, I think that would be, I agree with Linda, that would be the best option.
I think the issue would be that systems would have to be programmed to prefer, like if in Mark, if we put a label in, they would have to be programmed to prefer that over pulling in the label from the URI, which would be
right.
author agent.
Yeah, so if I manually put a label in, that should be what displays and not something that gets pulled in from somewhere else. That's right.
There are two people who have raised their hands. I'm not sure if they can be made audible or if we need to have them type a question in the chat. That's a technical question to ALA Digital Reference.
Yeah, let me see if I can find them. I'm not sure. I think this will support our turning on the audio. Let me find.
It looks like yes. I now see microphones next to their names.
Okay.
So I guess whoever came first, Seori Tachibana, if you would like to ask your question. If you can unmute yourself. Okay, Mary, go ahead, since you figured out how to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I could just say that mine was an accidental. I meant to hit Q&A instead of raise hand. Sorry.
Okay, Michael, do you want to unmute yourself? Michael maybe was accidental too. Okay.
I checked the Q&A session. As Kathy said, they're not be answered. It seems Adam, Melanie, they've.
Yeah, we've answered all of the ones in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Either live or by typing.
Okay.
Although I will note that the last question was talking about LC, PVC, MGD workflows were decided. That's not really a topic for NARDAC. If you are interested in that, you might want to ask for a presentation from PCC about that so that we can address it in the appropriate forum.
If there are no questions, maybe we can end the session a bit early.
Clara, I have a
Mhm.
suggestion that we could, since we do have a few minutes,
Mhm.
maybe people could, if people would like, you could put in the chat some topics you'd like to see us address at future forums.
That's a good suggestion.
If anybody has some suggestions for us.
I do see there's another Q&A. Are the examples real life examples? You mean MGD examples?
From the MGDs, the answer would be a mix. I believe we did, whenever we used some of the existing examples that were in the older policy statements, we added new ones. I know when I was doing it, I was looking for actual examples, but some of them I had to modify slightly to make them fit my situation. So it's a mix of real life, partially real life, partially made up, and there's probably some that are completely made up in there as well. So don't necessarily expect to search in the catalog and find those examples.
But many of them were. I mean, I worked on several of them, and I think I tried to find real examples for everything. So I think most people tried to find real examples.
Yes, we did try. It's just not always possible because some situations are really peculiar.
And there were a few places where we asked for examples because we couldn't find them.
Yeah.
So some MGDs say, if you have an example, send it to LC.
Exactly. We don't want to really make up a fake one, and then it doesn't make any sense to the catalogs. We think catalogs would love to see good examples. So yeah.
So if you have a good example, co-op at lsc.gov. We're glad to hear it. A session on aggregates. Yes, that would be a good topic. Further major developments anticipated. And more on the MGDs.
Well, Adam, I think that's not completely true.
I would consider the MGDs an integrating resource.
Yeah. So, I mean, for instance, one of the that I worked on is not completed because developments happened since the.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I mean, in general, the project is done, and most of them are obviously they're going to be updated over time.
The initial version, we are done with the initial version. Yes, completed.
And I would expect there will be new MGDs as new developments happen in RDA. So, I mean, we could certainly have take that into account for future NARDAC forums.
Mm-hmm.
And if PCC changes some decisions about whether you should use unconstrained URIs or constrained URIs, some things will need to be updated as well there.
But yes, we will certainly try to do more on upcoming changes for from the RSC. This is definitely the appropriate forum for that.
So, Kathy, are you suggesting that we spend some time talking about the working groups? I mean, we could certainly do that. Or are you just inviting people to go look at the landing page?
This is Jamie. I'm just going to jump in here real quick to take the opportunity to promote the next month's webinar, which will be the RSC answering questions about anything. So we expect to have 3 or 4 RSC members online and invite people to submit questions beforehand. Priority will be given to questions submitted beforehand, which you can find a form for on the registration. It's a free webinar. It's a free event. And we can address many of the questions that are coming. The RSC will be happy to address these kind of questions that are coming up right now. That's scheduled for May 25th.
Bless you.
Thank you. Oops, sorry.
I think we've received some good suggestions relating to the future topics. And even I believe at our ALA pre-conference workshop, some of the topics can be addressed. If there are no new questions, Jamie, do you think we will end the session now?
Sure, if that is your choice. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you NARDAC. We're always happy to host you guys for one of our regular webinars.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a nice day.